Hey guys, welcome to book review, I believe 113. Today I am reviewing Living Through the Korean War by Charles Carey Jr. Okay, so this book is obviously about the Korean War. It's sort of a compilation of nine either stories or speeches or retrospectives that people went through during the Korean War. Essentially divided into three chapters. The first chapter is speeches by world leaders. The second chapter is U.S. soldiers during the war. And then the third chapter is the Korean experience. There's also a short foreword and introduction. But anyway, the first speech is the grand, dear, supreme leader, Kim Il-sung. Now, Kim Il-sung, despite his later reputation for brutality and delusion, generally did have some reasonable complaints, I guess you could say, against the American people, and specifically the American imperialists. Well, now I'm starting to sound like him. At the start of the Korean War, essentially both sides were nationalists. But so a little history. After World War II, when Japan controlled Korea for like 50 years, I believe, Korea was going to become one independent country. But during the process of disarmament and surrender, the southern half of Korea, the Japanese occupiers and their allies, surrendered to the Americans, and in the northern half they surrendered to the Soviets. Now, this was only supposed to be a temporary arrangement until a unitarian government could come into place. The problem with this being is that both temporary sides had their points of view being largely influenced by who was occupying them about what the country should look like. And now it's nice to think that a grand election would have a national leader, but when you can't even agree to what sort of government that is, whether that side has a majority or not, the side that did not win or did not win the election, essentially, is going to have complaints to the point where they didn't even have one election, but they had multiple elections, some run by the sort of communist side and their sort of ways of electing leaders, and some run by the American side and the South Korean side by Ri. I think it's Kim Ri, who was the first South American, was the first South Korean president. So this first speech is about Kim Jong-il, or by Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il's father, about American imperialism, he uses the word lackey a lot, like Ri is a lackey to the American government. He cites numerous elections and how they were more fair on his side. Of course, he's biased. And of course, this is also a speech, so he's not like he's really giving a sort of secret, objective perspective. He's trying to achieve a specific ends through the speech of trying to convince people of his side. And really the first part having to do with more the history of how Korea came to be from Kim Il-sung's point of view is somewhat clear-eyed, but later on it becomes very delusional, as per the course. The second one is Americans should support the war effort in Korea by Harry Truman. And essentially, he repeated what was in the Marshall Doctrine, that aggression cannot be contained, as was sort of the policy during World War II with the Nazis, and essentially just leads to more and more problems. So we need to take this problem head on. And essentially he talked about how his biggest thing was this was a speech to the American people, so he had to convince them why that they should take a specific point of view of getting into the war and why it was important to them. He also mentioned sort of like, because it was to the American people, some of the sacrifices that needed to be made, and just some of the sort of more rote things that would need to happen for them to go to war. The third speech was by Herbert Hoover, and he said essentially the United States should get out of Korea. And it really was both with Hoover and with Truman. It really didn't focus on the Korean people so much as it did sort of the threat of communism, or the threat of the people that aren't like us, people that are not our allies, even if they aren't communists, if it goes by another name, people that disagree with us. Which, as deluded as Kim Jong-il, or Kim, I keep saying Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il's father, was, and his viewpoint was just incorrect largely. He did sort of come from the perspective of the Korean people. Now, however misplaced that is, I can at least appreciate that he did that. But essentially the reason Hoover said that we should not get into Korea didn't really have anything to do with the Korean people or their point of view. It had to do with where the United States could protect itself militarily. And it essentially took this Fortress Britain mentality, in that the United States can protect Britain, it can protect North America, it can protect South America, so long as they're kind of on board, which they kind of were, kind of weren't. They can protect Japan, and they can protect the Philippines, and they can protect Formosa, Taiwan. But they can't protect Western Europe, and they can't protect South Korea. Now, why is this? Well, it should be pretty, if you think about the geography of it, it should be pretty obvious. He said that the United States has a superior military, or Air Force, it has a superior Navy, and in a lot of ways, technologically, it has a superior army, but it just couldn't keep up with the sort of cannon fodder that the Asiatic and communist bloc countries of the Soviet Union and its lackeys could essentially send into the fight. He said that in France and Western Germany, Italy, etc., that essentially their fight against the communists was up to them. That the United States could ally with Great Britain because it was an island, but could not. It still ally and try to help them, but their self-defense was largely in their own hands. This is the same case that he came with Korea, in that essentially, eventually the numbers would just be overwhelming and the United States could not protect Korea, which I think is a little bit crass, but it's kind of true in a way that if you just look at the strategic point of view of it, but maybe was a little, I don't know. It just didn't feel like it really took in all the perspectives. Okay, so chapter 2 is U.S. soldiers in war. And the three sub articles are: a reservist goes off to war, remembering good things in a bad war, life in American prisoner of war in Korea, and racial prejudice against African Americans in the Korean War. So I guess there's 4 of them. The first one, Reservationists Go Off to War by William H. Hopkins. So this was essentially a guy that fought, I'm going to take this jacket off because it's getting hot, that fought in World War II, came back to the United States, got his law degree, was not a rich lawyer, was just kind of starting out his law firm, so he wasn't exactly making a large amount of money at this point. So in order to supplement his income, decided to join the reservationists, or the reserve, the United States Reserve, thinking that, well, we have these Soviets, but it's a Cold War, and World War II is over, so it'll be just kind of an easy way to make money on the side. Besides, up to this point, reservists were largely called into action only after the Army had exhausted all of its resources. So he really thought that, hey, this is a little way I can make a little money on the side. Little knowing that, I think like 6 months later, his unit would be called into action. Now, it doesn't actually talk about him going to Korea, but it talks about, largely in the article, it starts with kind of getting the news and then all the preparation involved, or sort of getting the news of the war, that the North Koreans had attacked the South Koreans. Now, this largely takes place in Virginia in the United States. I mean, like, the story takes place in Virginia. So he's hearing this news. and kind of the slow development, or well, it's not really slow, but just sort of like getting ready to go to war, like talking to family members, talking to friends, kind of some of the basic training they had to do before they went off to war. Second story, otherwise this is going to get really long. Remembering Good Things in a Bad War by James Brady. This was probably, I don't know, I think it was probably the best piece written in the article. It largely had to do with kind of the cold mornings, kind of the isolation of the front lines, because while there was discipline in a way in the front lines to defend yourself against the enemy, a lot of sort of the more BS parts of the military, of making sure you're spick and span and everything is up to code, kind of fall out the window when you're fighting your enemy. And I think the U.S. military largely acknowledge that. Kind of a lot of what they do more on the back lines is kind of mentally, they do these kind of BS things to mentally prepare people so that when they're in a firefight, they can kind of be able to concentrate. But yeah, he talked about sort of how out in this rural area of Korea, and in some areas of North Korea, and even in South Korea to this day, it's still like this, where it's not just rural in the sense that like there aren't very many people, but there's signs of human life, like agriculture or logging or pastoral lands. In a lot of these more sort of rugged mountainous areas, there's nobody. Like there's no fences, there's no barns, there's no houses. It's literally just sort of the stillness of the wintertime. He also mentioned that there were a lack of birds in the region, so there wasn't a whole lot of sound. There was just sort of like this utter quiet of, the pine trees and these sort of sawtooth mountains, and occasionally they run into soldiers. Now, I didn't mention that in the story, but that was kind of what happened. And it was very well written. Okay, next piece. Life as an American Prisoner of War in Korea by Donald Elliott. Okay, so Elliott was captured. I think he spent maybe like a year and a half as a prisoner of war of the North Vietnamese Army. He moved around to a number of different camps. I think he said there were like 800 people that were captured, kind of not immediately at the same time, but kind of in this group that eventually coalesced. Sort of early on. And of those 800 that were kind of captured in a similar time period, he said that only 400 survived, or maybe it was less than that. I think it was like 300. So over maybe, 300 to 400. So it was less than 50% of the people that were captured during this time of POW that actually survived, which was really crazy. He said that they fed them like pigs, and not in the sense that they gave them a lot, but they just gave them stuff that was hardly edible. What else? Like, for example, he gave them soybeans, but soybeans have to be boiled for like 12 hours before they become edible. Otherwise, you get the runs. And so what would happen is these soldiers would get uncooked soybeans as sort of like the lowest rung of product. And they just have to boil the soybeans for the time that they were given, which was like 30 minutes, and then drink the water off the soybeans, hoping that some of the nutrition got into the water while boiling, but couldn't actually eat the soybeans themselves because they would die. Or not, well, sometimes they would die because they would get dysentery and they'd either recover or die, and being in such a weakened state as a POW and being treated in terrible conditions, sometimes they would pass away. As I mentioned a second ago. Eventually they had an exchange program kind of when the armistice happened, where a lot of North Korean soldiers and people that were captured by the South would be exchanged. But what was interesting about this is both sides gave the option of people that were captured to stay on their side or to exchange over. And I think less than 1% of the North Korean soldiers that were captured, or auxiliary people, went over to North Korea, whereas I think of like the 3,000, or I don't know, some large number of American soldiers and South Korean soldiers that were captured by the North, all but like 20 of them decided to go back to the South when they were given the option and the opportunity. So that says quite a bit about the, I mean, if that doesn't say something, I don't know what does. That doesn't say anything about the state of North Korea. Let's see. Racial prejudice against African Americans. This was a piece written many years, like 30, 40 years after the war, that kind of re-examined a lot of the documentation written during the war about whether this unit of black soldiers who were viewed as incompetent or sort of irresponsible, whether it was, and there was actually an incident that went down, I forget what the, yeah, it doesn't say right here. There was an incident that happened where, like, the soldiers were, and this was a unit of, like, I don't know, like 500 or something, or maybe it was smaller than that, but largely black soldiers, that the commander ordered them to sort of go into enemy territory or, like, close to the front lines, but they didn't, like, set up defensive positions. So they were largely overrun by North Koreans during a nighttime attack, I believe. And it was kind of blamed on the unit themselves, even though their upper tier commander was actually a white man. I have to open this door. Even though their upper tier commander was largely a white man, it was kind of blamed on the soldiers for not having the discipline to know how to act as soldiers and defend their ground. Well, many years later, it was kind of confirmed that it was really the officers' fault, and that it gave a number of instances of the men, of not all of the men, because inevitably a strata of any human ethnicity, there are going to be some people that are brave and there are going to be some people that are cowards. But it gave numerous examples of black soldiers that were brave in their, in their defense against, you know, these North Korean attackers. Okay, so that's the second section. This is like a 100-page book, so I'm going way long on this. Life as a North Korean refugee. I'm going to go a little bit faster through these just because it's another really great section, but this review is just getting long. North Korean refugee, kind of talking about a North Korean that fought in a militia against the North Koreans, like he was from North Korea, but he fought against the communists, and eventually found his way south, but rather than become a soldier, was put in a refugee unit, and kind of the sort of corruption and quick money scheming, or, you know, scheming the cream off the top of the U.S. military barrel of cream, of milk that was coming in, and kind of some of his complaints about that, but ultimately how things worked out and how he was able to ultimately be successful in the new South Korea. Korea was devastated by the war. This was a speech written by YT Pyong, that essentially asked for more aid from the U.S., that essentially complained that it wasn't just the U.S. The U.S. and the UN allies were sending huge amounts of money and bombs and munitions into the Korean Peninsula and engaging in a full-on hot war, North Korea versus South Korea, that was devastating the society, but really wasn't ponying up to help these people that were in a state of starvation. You know, we view South Korea now as largely prosperous, but at the time period, it was devastated by the war. They had to essentially start from ground zero. So there was just kind of a plea about that. And I think eventually the United States did deal with this humanitarian crisis that was on their hands, if somewhat delayed. The 50-year division of the Korean society. This is when Kim Jong-il, the son of Kim Il-sung, decided to have family members from the North reunified with family members from the South. Something that was unique about the North and South Korean split was that, unlike in other parts of the communist bloc, where people were split along borders between countries that were created because of the split between capitalism and communism, where they could sometimes visit one another, it was a hard split along the North Korean and South Korean line where nobody Nothing, zero. It was completely shut off. And so if you had some members on the north side of the line, some members on the south side of the line, they wouldn't see each other for 50 years until this event took place. Now, something that was mentioned in this piece was that largely a lot of the North Koreans came over more prosperous than initially expected. And it was they certainly towed the party line when interacting with their family. I got a feeling that the North Korean side specifically chose these people. They were still family members, of course, but they chose these people for being loyal people. If there was a family member that was split, and maybe the family on the north side wasn't so loyal to the communist North Korean side, then they weren't getting being able to make this visit. Okay, well, this is one way too long, but Living Through the Korean War, edited by Charles Jerry Jr. All right, keep 20 minutes for this. Keep checking it out, you guys. I'm sure I'll do some more reviews later. All right, bye.